Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Let me start today with a question. How much do you love what you do? Do you like your job? So, today, you are lucky. You are in for a treat. I have someone that really cares and deeply loves what he does. He is Dave Hoekstra, product evangelist at Calabrio, and he's joining us for today's episode. I hope you enjoy it. Hi everyone, welcome back. As you heard in the intro, today I have a very special guest, someone that I think no one that does not need an introduction. I think when I think about workforce management, Dave, you're probably one of the names that comes to mind. So with me, like you know, Dave Hoekstra, a WFM evangelist at Calabrio. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andre. It's really great, and I am a big fan of what WFM is doing. You guys have really stepped up the game, and I think the community out there really needs more attention like this. And I think what you guys are doing is fantastic.
Thank you so much. And it's great to get that feedback. So before I start, I really wanted to go into probably a question that everyone asks. So, what does an evangelist do and does for Calabrio, and specifically within workforce management? So, how did you come up with this job title? Because it's so different and unique.
Well, Evangelist does. I often joke that when I tell people my title, I can visibly see the question mark that forms above their head as to just exactly what does that mean. And so, really, what an evangelist does is mostly it's their job to spread the word, right? To make sure that people get as excited about a tool or a product or a process as that person is, right? And yes, there is a odd religious connotation sometimes that gets attached to it, but it's not like I walk around putting my hand on people's foreheads and saying optimize, optimize, right? But what it really boils down to is that a little bit of a background. We at Calabrio kind of determined that our marketing department was doing really great job, but the marketing department needed some product knowledge, and the best way to do that is to kind of put some product knowledge in, infuse it together with the marketing team, and that's how the evangelist role was kind of born. I spent most of my time in kind of a pre-sales role where I would, do demos for customers and things like that. And over the course of time, the knowledge I gained and also the maybe I was a little tired of doing that after a long time. That it worked out perfectly. So essentially, my role is to provide knowledge to people. So I do a lot of webinars. I do the Calabrio podcast. I do videos and audio and lots of different things to kind of assist in our marketing and sales teams to make sure that they have the proper information out there to go and make sure everybody loves Calabrio as much as I do. So essentially, it's a very fluid job, and my job role seems to change every 2 to 3 months depending on what we're doing. But it's super exciting, and I get to do really fun stuff like talk to you.
Yeah, that's amazing. And with that being said, I think to your role it adds up. Like I think I'm not going to fail, but you have for sure over 20 years of experience within of different flavors of workforce management, even on the vendor side. Or I know you started like a way back as an operational trainer, if I'm not mistaken. So, how much do you think that all of those experiences added up for you to be where you are today within this role?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, if I really boil down to what my job is a storyteller. I tell stories about my experiences, either doing WFM myself or working with customers who have done it, right? And if there's one skill that I have that keeps me employed, it's the ability to remember all these great stories that people have told me over the years about this crazy situation where somebody needed weird breaks scheduled, or the ability to pull from historical pieces and really tell these stories that involve us, right? And that's always what I've loved so much about workforce management, is that it has that rare quality of being crazy math that goes into it, right? And if you want to see crazy math, just check out the WFM Telegram. CC math section, right? That's even insane for me. I go in there and my head starts to hurt. But it combines the math and the people, right? And that's what I really loved about it was that in the end we're using math to make people's lives better, right? Whether
Hmm.
it's the agents themselves or the the management and the efficiencies that are gained from it, and then even trickling down all the way to the customers. We're ultimately, our job is to make people's lives better, and that's what I really liked about it. And it was a great blend of those two things. So as a storyteller, I just try to make sure that I convey the emotion and the happiness and sometimes the frustration, let's be honest, of working with contact centers and workforce management.
Great. I think it's the perfect segue. So, in your own words, what does workforce management truly mean to you?
In my own words, well, if I'm trying to convince you to use a fantastic product like Calabrio Workforce Management, what I always say to people is workforce management is really just about one thing, right? Am I appropriately staffed? Right? And like every single question you ask or answer in a day-to-day WFM operation leads and funnels directly to that one question. Am I appropriately staffed? Am I appropriately staffed today, tomorrow, this afternoon, next week, next month, next year? And then what I like about it is that the term appropriately staffed is very subjective, right? Some contact centers want to be very aggressively efficient and they really want that razor thin margin and where that to them is appropriately staffed. And I've worked with some contact centers where appropriately staffed means that literally not one caller ever is waiting to get their contact answered, right? So that's up to the individual contact center. And so we use our various software, our experience, our journey to help answer that one question. Am I appropriately staffed? And if we can boil everything down to that single answer, then we've done our job. Sometimes it's not easy, right? We have customers and colleagues that have to deal with insane level of detail when it comes to appropriate staffing. But that's what it boils down to in my mind.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a simple answer to a question that sometimes is really hard to answer, because I agree with you. The complexity, it really differs between use case to use case. But in the end of the day, we are just trying to make sure that we will do the best we can with the resources we have. So I think it's an amazing answer. With that being said, workforce management revolves around a cycle that I think everyone listening knows it pretty well. But for the ones that don't know, there are multiple steps within a workforce management cycle, and very often, I mean, I think different roles will say that there are parts more important than others, but forecasting is considered one of the most critical parts of the cycle. In your view, how critical do you think it is, and how do you see that level of detail on forecasting evolving over the last years?
I'll answer your question with another question. How important is the foundation of your home that is built upon? Right. So, we laugh, but to me, forecasting is kind of the main course, and everything else is just, if we go with French, it's just the accoutrement, right? It's the gravy, it's the icing on the cake, right? If you get the forecast right, everything else is so much easier. And that's I hate to say that's what I preach being an evangelist, but I do preach that, right? Talking to a lot of customers is just, especially ones that are when you're first starting your journey into WFM, everything is important, right? Every single aspect is critical, and it's overwhelming. And we're often trying to just get our arms around every little detail. When you get comfortable with that, that's when I really like to stress the importance of forecasting, because if you get it right, the decisions later just are so much easier. You stress so much less about staffing and agent engagement and all the little neat cool tools and buttons that we have. None of that works without a good forecast.
Mhm.
And so to me, it's the absolute most critical part of our role. You can't answer the question, am I appropriately staffed, without a good forecast. You have a bad forecast, that answer is impossible to answer.
Yeah,
But with a good forecast, everything becomes simpler.
yeah. I really like the analogy on the house foundation, because that's what you are doing. In the end of the day, you are just trying to make sure that all the other pieces lay out perfectly to kind of predict the best possible outcome. I wanted to go a bit deeper. I mean, we don't need to get. I think you said it right. I think we don't need to go in hyper level of detail. There are people
Oh, come on. We're
much,
WFM people. That's what we do. That's what we
but
do.
I think everyone can go in the mathematical details. But I wanted to think more about from your. I mean, you had loads of learnings, loads of stories, probably from different customers. But like I wanted to focus on forecast specific on tips, tricks, ways to optimize the outcomes, and especially things that maybe you should pay more attention to. And if you don't mind, I will start with one because I think that's kind of like one that I normally see failing, which is the quality of the data that you have in. So normally there is a saying that says garbage in, garbage out. Like
Hmm.
if you are not getting the right data, if you are not getting like the cleanest of data as possible, like you will not get the probably the best results. So I think that will be my first tip, is making sure that you spend time really reviewing and getting your data double check, triple check to make sure that it will help produce the best possible outcome. But I wanted to give the word to you. So, which kind of tip and trick would you recommend?
Well, that's a great one, right? And if I can switch metaphors here, right? Forecasting is the foundation of the house, right? But a proper forecast, getting the right answer is like tending to a garden. We can't just throw some seeds on the ground and hope that they grow, right?
Hmm.
We have to take all the necessary steps. We have to till the earth, we have to prepare it, we have to then plant, we have to make sure we use the right organic fertilizer, we have to weed the garden, we have to pluck all the little things that are going to invade our forecast and cause things to go awry. Then once the forecast starts to grow, we have to make sure we apply the appropriate organic pesticides, right? We have to make sure that to get the crop that we want, we have to
Hmm.
really tend to it. And I can tell you, in my past experience, literally every single time a customer or someone who has approached me somewhere and says, "I'm having trouble with my forecast accuracy," I can almost always guarantee you that that person's not quite doing all of the steps that are necessary to validate their incoming data, right?
Hmm.
And validating the incoming data can mean simply making sure your ACD integration is pulling across the right information, right? If we don't get that right, nothing matters at that point. But if
Hmm.
the information on the integration is coming in appropriately, then are we making sure we smooth out those anomalies, right? Are we asking the question, is what happened yesterday what was supposed to happen? And if it didn't, why? What train really digging into the reasoning behind things like that. And that historical data, that's the lifeblood of our forecast. Now, there are scenarios where people do not get the necessary proper validation that they can get
Hmm.
because their volumes are so volatile. But in most cases, if someone says to me, "I'm not getting the accuracy I need," I can almost guarantee you that that person's not putting in the pre work to the forecast and validating that information beforehand. So you have to go and you have to remove those special events. You have to make sure that those anomalies are smoothed out. You have to make sure that, not just in volume, but in handle time and after call work, or if we're talking about, some of the different
Hmm.
channels, making sure your concurrency numbers are set up correctly in chat, right? It's all of those different things, and sometimes it's about just going through a simple checklist. But forecast accuracy, it's a result of the work we put in. It's not a result of the tool that you're using. It's not a result of any kind of AI or machine learning magic. It's literally about, are you going and are you pulling those weeds? Are you spraying the pesticides? Are you taking care of your garden on a daily basis? And if the
Hmm.
answer to that question is yes, forecast accuracy almost always goes up.
I love that one because even within that analogy, you can talk about seasonality because like weather seasonality, different types of seeds,
Yep.
different types of growths, and here is the
Yeah,
same like
you
in
gotta go and
forecasting.
put the little plastic over if it's gonna get cold. You gotta, do you build the greenhouse? Do you not build the greenhouse? Right. It's a fun analogy that can really help demonstrate what we do and why we do it. Because at the end of the day, that
Hmm.
forecast, when you hit that 98, 99% accuracy regularly, That's like getting a big, juicy, beautiful tomato that just everybody goes, "Wow, this guy has a green thumb and really knows what they're doing." And that is the big, juicy tomato of our industry, is a 99% forecast accuracy.
I love that one. And I think you mentioned something that I really relate to, which is, and especially to everyone that is listening, is especially the ones that are doing the like this job for the least amount of time. I think forecasting is a lot to do with the purpose. Like, what's the purpose behind it? Like, what are we trying to eat? Like really understanding that. And I think the analogy of like gardening, it's really good because you have a clear purpose. Like, you want to produce like beautiful flowers or fruits, whatever it is. And you talked about that on like volume, but like all the other different metrics, AHT, etc. And sometimes if you just focus on one, and you just, okay, the other ones, they will grow somehow, you will lose that kind of purpose on putting, like you said, the attention, the details, and making sure that you will collect the benefits. So I don't know if you have experience with, and you can share, but I think there is probably most people focus on the volume, and they sometimes disregard the importance of the purpose of going to all the other metrics, all the other concurrency. You said a perfect example. It's as important as that volume, like, because if that fails in the end of the day, you will not get the best outcome.
That's the fun part of WFM. And I know that probably people that are just getting started in this journey are probably like, shut up, Dave. This is not fun. I'm not having fun because, there's I just imagine this wall full of pulleys and levers and switches and dials and everything like that, and it's so frustrating because I turn this dial and this thing drops, and that's what WFM can be like. And so again, you kind of have to start at the base level. Am I appropriately staffed? Right. And if you look at the key is no, I was not appropriately staffed yesterday. Okay, what happened? Well, sometimes the answer is really easy. We had high absenteeism. Okay, I can explain that
Mhm.
away. But sometimes the answer is not so easy. Sometimes we have to dig down and we have to find out, right, what was my
Mhm.
occupancy on the day? Are my service level targets set appropriately? Did I receive the appropriate information from the marketing department? Right? Did they surprise me with a free shipping promo that no one was ready for in the contact center? These are all the things that sometimes we have to dig down into, and then we get
Mhm.
into the really kind of nerdy stuff, right? Should I be using Erlang A versus Erlang C? Do we have our occupancy target set as part of our goals, right?
Mhm.
um, is shrinkage set appropriately? Did I set my shrinkage too early and now it's way too long, right? These are all, I mean, this is just a
Can go
tiny
intense.
example of all those different things that go into. But for those people that are just getting started in this or really struggling with this, simplify, right? Don't
Mhm.
get lost in the weeds so much, to go back to the gardening analogy. um, Ask that question. Was I appropriately staffed? No, I
Mhm.
wasn't. Okay, well, let's figure out what happened. Was my forecast correct? Actually, my forecast was okay. All right, so we can eliminate that as a problem. So the next step is, did I have the appropriate number of forecasted hours? You know what? Looking at it, I didn't have the appropriate number of forecasted hours. All right, why is that? Okay, if I dig down and you keep digging and you find out, you know what? My concurrency was set inappropriate on my chat. I was giving I have it set at 4 chats per agent, but in reality, my agents are only handling 1 to 1.5
Mhm.
chats at a time. Okay, well, maybe we need to dial back that concurrency, right? And then you do the same thing the next day and the same thing the next day, and that's what workforce management is just it's like being a detective, right? This may be too old of a reference for a lot of people, but I loved reading Encyclopedia Brown stories when I was a kid. Encyclopedia Brown, maybe if you don't know, is he's a boy detective that would be presented with these problems, and using the clues in the stories, you
Mhm.
could figure out what the answer to the mystery was, right? So it's kind of like a miniature whodunit, and I loved reading those as a kid. And maybe that's why I like WFM, is because it's a constant mystery that we're trying to,
Figure out.
continually solve every single day.
Yeah, I like that one. Actually, know about the books. I think they are very old, but they still publish books on detective
Hey, what do you say? I mean,
encyclopedia.
I read those when I was a kid. That doesn't mean they're very old. What are you trying to say here,
No, no.
Andre?
Oh, no, no, don't get me wrong. I was just I think they are old because they were probably here way before. I don't know from what time they date to, but it's I remember those quite well.
Good.
I wanted to continue on this path we are going because I think we are starting to share some interesting advice. Since both of us, I think I will speak for you, but we both love and deeply care about workforce management. I think it matches with why the WFM exists and why you have the role you have. I think it could be interesting to share some kind of tips and advices and on common mistakes or things that, and now that everyone that is listening, please pay attention to these ones because those could be interesting ones. Lessons learned, things to avoid, myths to debunk. Like, and I wanted to kind of like, since I have you here, start with you. Like, which kind of like recommendation would you give? Like, what kind of myth you want to debunk to the audience?
Well, I could tell you when I get asked if I've made any mistakes in my career, the one that always comes to mind is that I thought I was alone in solving these problems. And granted, what back in 1999 and 2000, when I was really kind of getting cranked up in this, we didn't quite have the same networking capabilities that we have today, right? With groups like WFM and some of the LinkedIn learning that's out there, and there are so many free resources that exist. Um, we have the ability to tap into a much larger hive mind of how to solve these problems. But I can't tell you how often I still see it to this day. Someone will come to me and I have a question, and I'm like, why didn't you ask this to the community, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because it almost dawns on them. Oh yeah, there are lots of people out there that deal with these same problems, have dealt with these same problems, continue to deal with them, that I could have asked, and I probably could have answered my question in 15 minutes. This is what I love so much about the WFM Telegram group. Yeah, I mean, there are some days where I'm like, okay, please stop. I don't
Hmm.
need another notification. But that's because the community just immediately leaps in and starts helping with these questions that people have. So, I mean, from a high level perspective, I would say that the hugest tip I could give anybody is to leverage your networks. Use your friends, use your colleagues that are out there. And here's the thing: doesn't matter what software you use, right? And this is
Hmm.
really important. I see a lot of, well, I use this one and I use this one and we don't like this and that kind of stuff. Guys, we're all in this together. And
Hmm.
again, our job is not to say, am I appropriately staffed using software vendor X, right? It is, am I appropriately staffed? And when we've got the group out there that can help with this, I think that
Hmm.
you'd be silly not to leverage that. Now, if I'm looking for a more tactical tip, I would say the biggest problem I see with so many contact centers is not understanding why your certain targets are set the way they are. Why is your service level target set at 80/20? I don't know. Well, go find out. Right now, immediately go find out. And if no one in your organization can answer that question, you're probably wasting money. And
Hmm.
it may take a little while for you to convince the rest of your team that we need to shift gears. But the difference between an 80/20 and an 80/30 service level can be hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of a year, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're set at 80/20 and you could go to 80/30, you might be costing your company an extreme amount of money, right? And so that's that. If for a more tactical tip, if you don't understand why your service level target is set at this, why your CSAT scores are set at this, why your ASA target is set at this, if you
Hmm.
don't understand and you can't explain that to a level of, oh, we did some research 3 years ago and we found out that our caller tolerance, our time to abandon was set at 35 seconds, so we set it at 30 seconds, and that's where, okay, that's fantastic. If you understand the reason why it's set that way,
Hmm.
go for it. If you don't, find out today and then adjust your goals accordingly.
And I
So
would just
sorry, that was
add,
a bit of a ramble there, but
no, but I think that journey of figuring out it's super important. You will probably learn way more than just the reason why. So I think I would recommend everyone to go in the weeds of trying to figure that out. And you said something that I totally relate to, which is we are all in the same boat trying to solve the same answer. And many times I think this is common, like specifically when we think about planning, like it's not only within the kind of like contact center industry, it happens in supply chain. Everyone is trying to figure out, are we properly staffed? I think that answer,
Mhm.
and that the answer to that question, it does not know boundaries, does not know limitations between industries. So I think
No,
it's super
restaurants,
interesting. Yeah,
warehouses, logistic companies. I mean,
pick one.
IT support, everybody, because people are expensive, right? And
Hmm.
that's what we need to do is that we need to make sure we solve. If we were just staffing robots, Andre, none of us would have jobs
Yep.
because robots can work for 3 seconds and then stop for 10 minutes and then work for 8 minutes and then stop for 45, right? They can do that. Human beings can't, right?
Yeah.
And we laugh that, oh, I had a colleague a few years ago who was just sure that by like 2025 call centers wouldn't exist anymore, that AI was just going to take over and everything. And the pandemic taught us that that is absolutely the opposite of the reality. Now, I'm not saying by the year 3000, Andre 3000, I can do that. I've been sitting on that joke for an hour. Um, by the year 3000, it will be heavily automated. But at the end of the day, we all know that the systems that are behind all of this AI and machine learning are built on human
Hmm.
technology, right? And that's the problem, is that we cannot teach a machine to think. When someone calls in and says, yeah, I called 7 times over the last 2 weeks and here's 18 different pages of notes that I'm trying to sort through and figure out about why this problem is happening, then a machine will never be able to go, oh, I see what the problem here is, and let me go ahead and I got to make 3 phone calls to correct it, right? Those are the things, and that's where the industry is headed. Is the
Hmm.
complicated stuff is what's making it through to the agent, and we will always need human beings. So to loop this all around, our job is to make those human beings as efficient as possible without
Hmm.
destroying their their will to live, so to
The
speak.
I agree, and I, I think it touches on that one. But I think one of the common myths, I don't know from your experience what you'd say about that, but that I see very oftenly being shared is there are multiple roles within, let's say, the contact center industry, different service roles, and even though we are focused on getting the right stuff, etc., there is still a lot of people that don't see the value on connecting, like when we look at processes. Like a good example is in your contact center you'll get top 10 contact reasons. Those are the ones that customers normally call. What are you doing in the end of the day process wise to help solve those, apart from just throwing people? Like, I think this is a super important myth that normally everyone says, oh, kind of like goes. I think it's not valid anymore. The kind of WFM people is kind of like they are in the back, like back office work, keeping everyone running. But in the end of the day, I see more and more workforce management being on the front end, trying to help answer why do customers call and how important that is for from a process management perspective. So I wanted to get your thoughts because I think it's a huge myth that it's not important to know the details on those contacts. And I think WFM has a huge role on leveraging those data pieces to the business. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so I we had a discussion at our user conference about traits that lead to successful people in our industry, right? And so we talked about
Hmm.
QM people, we talked about reporting and analytics people, we talked about workforce management people. And the trait that kept on coming up over and over, regardless of the role, was curiosity, right? What really wanting to understand why something happens and what we can
Hmm.
do about it is such a valuable trait in any industry, to be honest. But when it comes to the contact center, especially for workforce management, um, you know, 10, 15 years ago, yes, WFM was the guy who sat in the back corner in the dark corner and just hammered away on Excel spreadsheets and entered in exceptions. Ugh, if I never enter another exception in my life, I'll be happy. Um, but what started happening is the reporting tools got better, management styles got better, right? And
Hmm.
and we really started valuing that approach. And from a workforce management perspective, the number one thing that we can bring to the table is that ability to question why something is happening, to really say, okay, yes, we got hammered yesterday, but I got to go figure out what's going on. Now
Hmm.
that's dealing with the numbers, right? But what's happening now organizationally is we're stopping looking at the numbers so much and starting looking at the subjective data underneath the calls, right? So
Hmm.
instead of saying, yes, we got 1,000 calls yesterday over our forecast, we can now say things like, we got 1,000 calls over the forecast, and 84% of our calls mentioned this specific phrase, or 30% of
Hmm.
our calls were dispositioned in this certain way. And now we're starting to look at WFM becoming not just a call center role, but an
Hmm.
organizational role. The marketing department for a business now cares what the WFM person is saying, right? Sales really wants to know what that WFM person can extract from the data. And this is kind of the future of our industry. Is it's no longer talking about Erlangs and forecasting, right? It's talking about how many times a competitor's name was mentioned in our calls, and the statistics that go around that, right? We see an 84% decrease in handle time when we ask these two questions, right? Those are the real things that matter now. And to be honest, if I'd had access to some of these tools back in the early 2000s, I think my career path might be very different than it is right now. But that's the exciting and fun stuff. I mean, I challenge WFM leaders and analysts to break
Hmm.
outside of the Excel spreadsheets and the Power BI reports and start to connect and break down those
Hmm.
silos in data across the organization, because that's where the real efficiencies are going to come from.
Hmm.
We talk a lot about call reduction, which is an underutilized approach. How to reduce the number of calls that come into your contact center. Everybody's complaining about not having enough staffing right now, right? The
Yeah.
great reshuffling and quiet quitting and all the buzzwords that are happening. But in reality, how much are you doing to reduce the number of calls that your
Hmm.
contact center has to service on a day-to-day basis? If you're not looking
Yeah.
at it from that perspective, we might not be looking at it from the right perspective. So that's just a way of looking at things that I want to inspire people to think differently about their role in the contact center. Let's step away from the day-to-day button mashing and step out and start looking at organizational problems and what can be solved. Don't ask yourself, what was the problem of the call center yesterday? What was the problem of the whole company yesterday?
Hmm.
And how can WFM approach that? And you'd be surprised that a lot of times the answer is we have an answer for that. So
Yeah. I mean, I think was perfect advice. I wanted to ask a more personal question. We are getting close to the end. I don't know if you have any book, any, I don't know, anything that you would recommend to someone that is joining this journey now, starting, trying to get more impact in their current role. Kind of like what kind of book, I don't know, movie, article would you recommend for someone that is trying to create an impact in their organization?
in my career, there have been two books that have been the most impactful. Um, the first one was From Good to Great. I believe Jim Collins. I believe that's his. We might remove this if I'm wrong, but I believe it was Jim Collins. From Good to Great.
Jim Collins,
Really
yeah.
fantastic look at how different approaches change the courses of companies all along. So I highly recommend, if you haven't read From Good to Great, buy a physical copy and read it with a pen in your hand, because you will have so many ideas that you jot in the margins as you're going through, and you will come out with dozens and dozens of little nuggets of wisdom that you will turn around, right? So that's kind of my if you want a business book that really kind of helps teach you how to look at things a little differently. If you want a really entertaining book, the most impactful book that I've ever read as a just an analyst from looking at for things was Moneyball. uh,
Hmm.
Moneyball changed everything. Now, I'm a huge baseball fan. I've loved baseball since before I could walk. And so reading the book Moneyball and the way that the team and the analysts approached it, undid 100 years of thinking in just a few seasons from what Billy Beane was able to do with the Oakland A's. I mean, again, I've read that book like 5 times, and every time I do, I read a different. I pull something different out of it. Now, quick tip to your listeners: you cannot watch the movie
I was going to
and
say
get the
that
same
probably
insights. The
the
movie is
movie.
very different.
Yeah,
There are some scenes where you go, okay, I see what they're doing here, but you really, really need to
go into
read the
the
book,
details.
because the
Yeah.
book goes into much more of the details and the analysis that happened and how they were able to,
Mhm.
it's how the game used to be about how tall and how strong you were, and then they turned it into how often you get on base, and it's such a, like, I get chills thinking about how different the game of baseball is unrecognizable. It's basically the pre-Moneyball era and the post-Moneyball era. And that's what is so fun about it, is they completely dissected the game and taught an entire
Mhm.
generation. That's why baseball teams are now hiring like Harvard grads to run their team instead of the dusty old veteran who's done it for 40 years, right?
Mhm.
And that's the analytics. And some say it might even have hurt the game a little bit. Too much analytics, right?
Yeah.
We've lost the human element. But Moneyball has always been my go-to. This is the book you should read if you want to understand an inspiring approach. Plus, it's probably a lot more exciting than most just traditional workforce management books.
And it will definitely give a different perspective. So my final question to you is, and I know you are on a good spot because you are very close to product, but I wanted to think about a different kind of like a different role for you today and now. So if you had no limitations and you could look at the WFM industry from kind of like a different perspective, where you could solve any problem, and there was no money issues, no time, no resource, you could put whatever in you wanted, like what would be the number one thing you would fix for the WFM industry?
I think the number one thing I would fix is to break down some of the silos of data that WFM has traditionally been associated with. And it's tough to answer the question without a lot of different data sources that come in, right? And we've seen organizations try to solve this through like business intelligence tools. You try and piece. The most successful organizations are the ones that look at their contact center as a holistic part of the whole, as opposed to just the customer service arm of the
Hmm.
organization. And it honestly, it's funny. The money might mostly be spent in just marketing efforts to teach the organizations to look at their contact centers from a different light, right? It
Hmm.
might be less on spending of the product because the tools are out there. We
Yep.
see organizations that are doing it and really doing it well. And those organizations they're saving so much money and they're getting such incredible return on their customer satisfaction and their CX scores and things like that. But for every one
Hmm.
organization that gets it, there are hundreds out there that are still old school. And oh, we have a call center. I didn't even know, right? That's basically the phrase that I've heard too many times in my career. But teaching organizations the absolute gold mine of information that sits in just the WFM department, but then when you expand it to the whole contact center, I mean, it's basically what I've dedicated the last 2 or 3 years of my life trying to convince organizations to look at the whole
Hmm.
as opposed to just the part. And so, yeah, I'd love to say, "Oh, we just build this amazing machine learning model that does all this really amazing and cool stuff." But to be honest, we're already doing the things we need to be doing out there as
Yeah.
WFM professionals. We are making sure that we are spending the money appropriately in our contact center budget to answer those calls. Where it really starts to change things is when we can say to the rest of the organization, "Hey, it's not about the numbers anymore. It's about the customer, and it's about how we make their
Mhm.
experience perfect. And then so blending those two things together would be the answer that I'd really want, is making sure WFM and CX are not just working together, but are the same thing, right?
More
By having
powerful.
your WFM department be the CX department, that's where organizations really start to make that change.
And it's, I loved it, and I think it's super powerful. If I think, I don't know how many hours we probably are in the same boats we spend trying to crack data, trying to make sure that it makes sense, validating. And I think if there was someone that could break that, those silos, and I think a lot has to do, like you said, with mindset, but as well as on the approaches. Like you need to spin off a bit on how you see the pieces laid out, and then I love the fact that you said like merging that into being one. I think it's definitely a huge advice. Dave, we are reaching the end. So for me, it was a huge pleasure to have you as a guest. I just wanted to give you the final word. Anything you want to say to our listeners?
The final word that I would say is that we're all in this for the same reason, and hopefully everybody loves WFM just as much as Andre and I do, right? But that's not always the case. I do not say that there's a 100% success rate in meeting people in the WFM, organizations that love it as much as we do. But what I would say is that, the challenge is there, and the ability to rank up is there, right? But don't limit yourself to just WFM. Contact centers in general, the walls are breaking down between the different departments, and your WFM knowledge and your ability to problem solve and compute and figure out things is just as applicable in other areas of your organization as they are in WFM. So we love having you in WFM. We want you to be in WFM for as long as you want to be there, but also recognize that your skill set and the things you're learning in workforce management are very applicable in other areas too. So don't limit yourself. Go for the big one, right? Get yourself out there. And yeah, sometimes it takes a little bit of time. I mean, I was in workforce management for 15 years before I finally cracked into a little bit more of expanded role. But you know,
Hmm.
keep the eyes on the prize, I guess, is if I had to boil it down to a bumper sticker.
I think if you allow me, I will use a word that you said. I think that is resumes most of our conversation, which is curiosity. Be curious. Ask
Be
questions.
curious.
I think
Be
that
curious, not judgmental, as Ted Lasso would and Walt Whitman would say. That's I have that written on my board over here to the left of me. It's be curious, not judgmental. Find the answers to the why. Don't get mad. Find the answer, right? And you will benefit huge from that mindset.
loved it. Thank you so much for the advice. Dave, was amazing having you here on the podcast. Thank you so much. For everyone listening, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next episodes. And thank you.
Thanks, Andre.
Thank you for listening to WFM. This podcast is made and produced by André Leitão, Bilge Hantolun, Doug Carsteton, Gonçalo Gomes, and Kim Paz. If you like this show, don't forget to share it with your friends and colleagues. Visit our website, wfm.com, to find more exclusive interviews and WFM content. See you next time. All rights reserved.